You're listening to my favorite podcast, The
Big Buck Registry.
Big Buck Registries.
Big Buck Registries. Big Buck Registries.
The Big Buck Registries Deer Hunt Podcast.
And welcome back to the Big Buck Registries Deer Hunt Podcast. It's been a hot minute since we've been on the mic, and thanks for tuning in. This is episode 302, and we're mixing it up a bit by joining forces with Wayne Saunders from the podcast Warden's Watch. As you may know, I've produced the Warden's Watch show with Wayne, and I also produced the Warden's Watch bonus series called Thin Green Line, hosted by Wayne and John Norris Jr., both former guests on the BBR. I might be a bit biased, but I strongly recommend that you check out the Warden's Watch podcast. It's a deep dive and an intriguing perspective of a game warden's world, filled with game cases and stories akin to the video series and fan favorite Northwoods Law. Recently on Warden's Watch, Wayne presented a very intriguing deer poaching case from 2010 that involved a diligent conservation officer named Chris Gilkey, a giant poached state record deer allegedly from Kentucky named Big Boy, and two Good Samaritan hunters named Obenshain and Brad Bailey, who happened to identify the deer mount at an outdoor show. The problem was that the story behind the state record deer didn't check out, so with permission from Wayne and the Warden's Watch podcast, we are revisiting excerpts from the show about this case of Big Boy. Normally, we wouldn't highlight a poaching case because we don't consider poachers as hunters. Poachers are thieves that steal from hunters like you and me and every hunter that does it right. The reason I wanted to dive into this is twofold. First, it's a great story, but secondly, it's a reminder that there are tools out there that hunters can use to report game theft anonymously. Through organizations like Operation Game Thief, every state has a method that has advanced since this case occurred, using a phone number and/or an app to report potential poaching cases. The apps are great because the lead ticket gets sent to the conservation officer for that area, and then the officer can follow up and communicate with the person reporting the potential offense. These tools promote conservation efforts and keep the bad apples out of our forests. This story is in two parts. First, from the conservation officer's perspective, and then from the perspective of hunters who identified Big Boy at the booth at the outdoor show in Ohio. So without further ado, here is Wayne Saunders and the story behind the poaching case of the former Kentucky state record buck, named Big Boy.
A case that's kind of unique in that, again, I always, have this conversation with every game warden, you're never off duty, and literally this case starts when you're off duty.
Yeah, it absolutely did. I've worked tons of deer cases in my career, and I've made a lot of really nice cases. I've been blessed to work in target-rich environments and be able to put cases together or work with officers where we had big cases to put together. But going back to 2010, this case right here will always stand out to me for numerous reasons. But one of the main reasons is how many connections it had and how it unfolded. And it taught me a lot. And listening to Ethan talk earlier about, making mistakes. Well, I still make mistakes. That's how we learn. And he mentioned that too. We make those mistakes and then we never make them again, and then we also lay in bed and we think about those mistakes at night. I think that's what any good game warden that's ever been burnt goes home and stares at the ceiling and plays that over and over and over again in their head. But that's something that I learned on this case as well. And it worked out though. So,
yeah. And again, a hunter, I'm going to call them deer researchers, actually, because some of these hunters turn into people that research these deer so much now that they build evidence for us if there's a case to be had in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely, they do.
And this is kind of how it started, right?
It's absolutely how it started, and it was back when still, you didn't have a whole lot of cell cams weren't a thing then in 2010, not that I recall. And still yet Snapchat wasn't around. There was a lot of these platforms, social media platforms that weren't really there. But this case started all from, so when I ended up in Adams County, I'm not from there. I didn't know anybody. And I met a local kid and two guys, and they kind of took me in, actually gave me a place to hunt.
Very nice.
And as a wildlife officer, you're always kind of figure out who's got an angle, because some people like to be friends with you because of your title, and some people, just think you're a good guy and want to help you out. And these two guys, Brad and Ian, were just that. I mean, they were two guys that were genuine, and it's like, hey, you're not from here. We're gonna help you out, give you a place to hunt, and that's how it started with a friendship. And then one day, they called me up and said, hey, man, we need to meet. We need to talk. I got something to show you. So they come to my house, and he pulls up a laptop, pops in an SD card, and he's videoing a soybean field. And it's a massive soybean field. And on the left, he zooms in, and here comes out a bachelor group of bucks. And I'm talking 140, 150, 160. Like, these were nice deer, really nice deer that anybody would be glad to shoot. Mm-hmm. And I believe this was around July or August. And so the beans were still really green. Anybody that's ever hunted soybeans kind of knows how that works. When they're green, they're out there feeding in the evenings. And as fall comes and they start to turn yellow, those deer abandon those summer patterns, and they go into their fall patterns, and they kind of leave the beans when they start to turn yellow until late winter. So he pans in on this bachelor group of bucks. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. And they just kind of look at each other and smile. And the camera pans out, and it goes to the right. And at the far right, he zooms in, and when it zooms in, it's a jaw-dropping whitetail. And it is a 200 caliber whitetail. And he comes out into the corner of the field, way away from every other deer. And they were like, hey, we wanted you to be one of the first to know that we're going to hunt this deer. We have permission on this property, and this deer is going to bring a lot of attention, and we want you to know about it and be in on it from the beginning, which was great. You know what I mean? That those guys obviously included and trusted me, as they should, as a county wildlife officer. But they did the right thing by bringing me in so early on and letting me know about it. So they follow that deer. They end up putting up a trail camera. And if I recall right, the first time they put up a trail camera on a trail, they get this deer on camera. And it's just gorgeous. I mean, it's just a monster. And he's a 6x6, and he's got a couple of stickers on one of the main, off one of the main beams. But this deer. So
for our Easterners here, that's a 12-pointer with a few stickers.
Yeah. So, 6x6. Yeah.
And does Ohio, if you hang so this is the comment, if you can hang a ring off it, you count it as a point?
Yeah. So I go off of what Boone and Crockett says.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm talking.
See, now that might just be a New York thing. You guys are trying to get all the points you can get.
There is no doubt. I've had some New Yorkers score some stuff, and they're like, that's a 18-pointer, and I said, huh?
Yeah. New York or PA. In Ohio, or the way that I consider it, if it's an inch or bigger and it's scoreable, that's what I call it.
Okay.
Inch
or bigger.
But you know what? It's your deer, and if it's got 20 stickers on it that are half inch, and you want to call it a 28 point, be my guest.
Okay. I just want to, clarify that for some of us, because it was funny when scoring became a big deal. They'd say something about 200. I'd say it was a 208 or something, and they'd be like, 208? Like, yeah, that was the weight of the deer. Because the East, we talk about the weight, not so much the scoring. Although that's starting to change. I'm seeing that. So, and I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
No, you're great. Yeah, I mean, because there's a lot of people listening to this that, don't come from our world. So, we may talk about lingo that somebody doesn't understand. So, yeah, it's good.
There is certainly lingo. And we had a Maine game warden doing some presentations, and he called them lambs. And that's very specific to Maine for fawn deer or lambs.
Really?
Yeah. Which, again, when he said that, I almost said, hey, can you clarify that for everybody else in the room, what you're talking about? Because even, we're in a budding state, and we don't call them lambs. We call them skippers.
Skippers?
Yeah. So that's kind of a New England type thing, because if you said it in Maine, they'd know what you're talking about. You said it in Vermont, but you come down to Ohio, and I said, yeah, I saw a couple skippers.
Yeah.
You'd be like, what?
Yeah, that would equate to somebody skipping a rock across the creek or something like that. Yeah, we call them fawns.
Fawns. Yeah. Yes, exactly, and that's what they are. So, and maybe that's because we felt like shooting a couple skippers sounds like shooting a couple fawns. It's better than that. So.
It sounds like it reminds me of a case where we were listening on radio conversation and they were using code words. So
yeah,
I'm kind of wondering where this was actually developed, Wayne. Like
it could have been. I'm not going to say it wasn't. So this epic deer. We're talking 6x6, so 12-pointer by our standards, with some other little
little junk on it.
Little junk on it. Yeah.
They put the trail camera up, and they literally get all these pictures of this deer immediately. And he always stayed by himself. And these guys started to track him and build him, and it was definitely something I felt confident that these guys' opening day of season was going to get a shot at, right?
Yeah.
And these two guys were so deserving too. I don't recall how they worked out who was going to shoot, but I think it might have been Ian that had got the property.
Yep.
And Brad was there to just film and just help him and encourage him. And these guys deserved it. They were so
put a lot of time into
so
it.
deserving of this deer. So when this deer shows up, immediately I notify my supervisor, and I'm like, hey, like this deer showed up in this area. I want to put an emphasis on protection of this deer.
This deer's going to cause a stir.
And it did. So anytime a deer of this caliber walks out in broad daylight and people can drive by and see it, it doesn't stay quiet.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay quiet. And that's the thing, if he would have stayed in and only come out at dark, but that's not what happened. We're in July, August, and our season comes in at the end of September. And so these deer are out of velvet by then. Our season comes in the end of September, and September 6th, this deer that they had nicknamed Big Boy, and anybody from back east around Ohio, Cincinnati area, Big Boy, Frisch's Big Boy restaurant, that they called it Big Boy because the two hunters, they used to meet up and like go through the footage and have breakfast at Big Boy. So they nicknamed him Big Boy, and I would have called him Hercules, but he was a big boy. So September 6th, they lose pictures, no more pictures of him. He just disappears. And just like any big monarch like that, it's not abnormal.
Right. That's not uncommon.
Yeah, not abnormal. So, season, as I had 5 years on at the time, and this is talking about, mistakes or things, and other wardens that are listening to this, something to think about. This is looking back, I just didn't think of this. So September 6th, the deer disappears, and I was aware of that. But September 26th is when season came in, right? In your head, well, that's 20 days. Nobody can hunt, right? The season's not in.
Right.
Yeah. So getting into that mindset of thinking that deer was such a big deer that there's no way that somebody would want to try to kill it outside of season, that was a mistake. So anybody that's got a big deer or has whitetail deer and you think that poachers only stick to the seasons, I'm here to tell you that's not true. They got all kind of techniques from putting them in the freezer and later on in this season or in this story you'll find out what happened. But so that was something that looking back, I'm like, man, I just never thought about that.
Right.
This story, fast forward, so that's, in September, this deer disappears, and we worked night project after night project after night project, saturation projects of officers in the area, and we worked, airplanes and everything else, trying to see if we could get somebody that was out there trying to seek out that deer and take it illegally. And we made no cases on that. So fast forward to February the next year, I'm at the Deer and Turkey Expo in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm actually there off duty, and I'm there. I've got a long-standing volunteer. I've done a lot of volunteer stuff with the Buckeye Big Buck Club. They were the ones who helped me build a resume back when I was when I was in college. It's kind of like a family with them, so they support the expo and score a lot of deer. So I always volunteer my time with them, which has been great. So I was actually there off duty with the Buckeye Big Buck Club volunteering in the merchandise booth, selling merchandise. Brad, one of the hunters that I mentioned, comes up to the booth, and he's white as a sheet of paper. And at the time, Brad's wife was actually pregnant, and she was pretty far along, and he runs up to the booth, which is in Columbus, Ohio, a couple hours from where we lived in Adams County at the time. And I thought immediately something had happened. Like,
his wife was...
anything, But that's the first thing that popped in my head.
You thought emergency was happening, and he sought you for help.
Absolutely. So I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And he goes, man, you ain't going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. He's like, you got to come with me right now. and he's like, it's Big Boy. And I'm like, it took a minute to register.
All right. Yeah.
And because, September, October, November, December, January, 5 months went by.
Yeah.
And we knew nobody had killed that deer, right? Because we never heard about it. And he's like, Big Boy, he's here at the expo. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you got to come with me. So we go down this aisle, and there that just beast of a deer sits on a pedestal mount. And he's there with a hunting show. And the guy who killed it, the guy's name was Johnny Clay, and he's sitting there with the deer. And on the placard on this pedestal mount, it says, New Kentucky State Record Longbow Kill. And it grossed $217, $218, and it netted like 197. The third largest deer at the time ever killed with a compound bow. Typical.
A very big boy.
A very big boy. Film crew was there, and they were selling DVDs. And now, so just so the listeners know, Adams County, Ohio sits on the border of Kentucky. So, do deer swim the river? Absolutely. We always say that the big deer killed in Kentucky swam over from Ohio.
Yep.
So, anyways, but we ended up, I approached Mr. Clay, and I'm in plain clothes, and I said, man, that's a heck of a deer. And I asked him to tell me the story. So he proceeds to tell me the story, which he also told on video for the film crew. And they had brought him on after the fact. So they didn't have kill footage of this. They brought him on after the fact about how he was in a tree stand, the deer come in, he made a bad shot. He knew he made a bad shot. He went back sometime later and couldn't find this deer, look for it. And he just knew that he couldn't give up. And he said he shot it on public land in Kentucky. And then one day he went back and he said he was looking, and then lo and behold, there he was, and he found his deer. I just listened to the story, and the whole time in my head, I'm like, okay, I know this deer isn't legal, but how are we going to make this case? How are we going to do this? So I congratulated him, and we left. And I called Ian, the other hunter. He was back in Adams County. He drove up all the video footage of the deer, all the pictures. But in the meantime, Wayne, the biggest problem was I was off duty. So I called my supervisor from Southwest Ohio, and I said, I'll never forget it. I called Dave Warner up, and I said, Dave, I'm about ready to make the biggest deer case in the state's history. And he laughs, and he says, yeah. He goes, okay, Gilkey. And I said, no. I said, do you remember this deer? And he remembered that deer, absolutely. And I said, it's here. It's tagged in as the Kentucky state record. And he's like, keep in mind, Kentucky's a bordering state. But this deer would have had to travel several hundred miles to be able to get to where this deer was killed, and it just didn't seem feasible.
Right.
So Dave said, Chris, he's like, I said, I have my gun, my badge, my credentials, everything I need. And he said, you're in a different district right now. I've got to call the district supervisor up there. And Kurt Smith at the time was the supervisor. And he called Kurt, and Kurt said, Chris has had some success interviewing, and if he knows this case, let's let him do it. So I was in plain clothes, and normally I'm a uniformed officer, so I'm in plain clothes, and they sent over a young officer that wasn't out of the academy that long, named Chris Rice, just so when we went and contacted him, me whipping out a badge out of my shirt doesn't look as believable necessarily as having a uniformed guy with me.
100%.
So that night, what I did was I researched, and everybody knows that, Facebook, everything else, people put everything out there, right? So I did whatever I could to gather as much information as I could to go into this interview. And so I didn't sleep. I might have slept like an hour and a half, because I was either going to be the guy who made a really big deer case, or I was going to be the guy who lost.
Right.
No, and I only had 5 years on, and in 5 years, like you said earlier, you're not green, but you're by no means a seasoned veteran,
right.
by that point. So the next day, me and Officer Rice, we go and we make contact at the booth, and I walked up in plain clothes, and I pulled out my badge, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about this deer. I said, everything's okay. It's just a big deer that has come across state lines, and we just want to make sure everything is okay. And he agreed to talk to us. People in the booth with the TV show started to, I felt a little bit of panic, and his significant other was there, and I could see some distress. We were talking earlier about off camera about reading body language and how important that is. And I could see all of these things, start to come together. So Chris, we'd already had a room set up for an interview, and we had taken Mr. Clay to the interview room while I explained to the company what was going on and why we were doing what we're doing. We go in and sit down with Mr. Clay, and obviously tell him that he's free to go at any time, and he agreed to consensually talk to us. So we were covering all of our bases there, and we told him anytime you want to walk out, you get up and walk out. You're not under arrest. You're free to go at any time. Ironically, I start off by talking to him about the deer, and he commits to the story and tells it verbatim like he had a million times. And then I pulled out some pictures of Big Boy. But the only difference is these are pictures of this deer in Adams County, Ohio. And I start to lay 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's just looking at it. Eventually I just set a stack. And I didn't say anything, and then I reached over and I pushed play on the computer. And I pressed play, and all of a sudden it's a film of this deer in the field that I'd witnessed before. And he just, without a beat, he just says, "That's my deer." Okay, so that's one nail in the coffin, right? We
identified it.
Yeah, he identified that deer, and it was so unique. So we continue on the interview with Mr. Clay, and he says that that's his deer, and then he sticks to a story about killing it in Kentucky, and he continues to go down that path. And so we just slowly start to shoot holes through a story, and it ends up to the point where he's backed up against the wall pretty hard. Like he didn't have anywhere to go. He just sat there and and long story short, we reminded him that he was a single dad, and there was a lot of stresses in his life, and he just wouldn't come off of this. And eventually we just asked him if the deer was more important than his son and his family. Because at this point he had taken it across state lines. He committed federal Lacey Act violations, and there's some pretty severe penalties for that. And it wasn't to the point where we actually asked him, hey, are you willing to put this deer above your son and your family? Are you going to make the truth a priority, or put them in a bad position? Because it's jailable. Like, you could go to jail for quite a long time for that. His big deal was he didn't want to go to jail. So then we had a decision to make, because we can't make that decision as officers, right? That's what the prosecutor has to do. So we made a phone call to the Adams County prosecutor at the time, briefed him on the case, and the prosecutor said that, with his confession, we would be willing to make a plea deal that had nothing to do with jail time. Obviously, him knowing the judge could do what he wants. So Mr. Clay ends up breaking down, and he gives us a full confession. And so this is where a lesson was learned. So the last pictures we had of this deer was September 6th. He was in there on September 6th, or the day after. He was dropped off, and he went in there, and he shot that deer in the daytime with a bow. And then he obviously took the head off of it and came back and got it later. And then set up and orchestrated the whole story about how it was killed in Kentucky and how he didn't find it later. Clay ended up coming clean, and we ended up follow this all the way till we get to court. And Clay had 13 priors. So following this case all the way till we get to the point where we go to court, what ended up happening once we get into court is Johnny ended up having 13 priors. So 13 priors for deer poaching, trespassing. When we get into court, and we'd obviously already discussed the fact about the no jail time. And people listening to this, that's the thing. I know a lot of times they see us cases go through court, and they're like, that guy deserved to have, he deserved to have 10 years in jail, or he deserved to have this. And we're with you.
Yeah,
like, as officers, we agree with you. But the thing is you have to have a prosecutor that agrees with you, and you have to have ultimately the judge. I mean, the judge is the one who makes the ultimate decision of what happens. So sometimes we have to make decisions to get the most out of this case, guaranteed, and it's not always what we want to. Did he deserve to go to jail? Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But what ended up coming out of this that I was satisfied with, I felt that did the case justice, that hurt him way more than any amount of jail time could, was in the end result, he pled out, and the judge accepted the plea deal. He pled out and took a lifetime hunting rights revocation. So he can never legally hunt again. And then in the violator compact, of course, that qualifies him for all 50 states. He paid, some fines and cost, and he forfeited his bow. But the biggest thing is we came in with our restitution law. If we got any poachers out there listening, pay attention to this one if you decide to come to Ohio. We ended up doing the trophy restitution law, and that deer cost him $23,572.05.
Just say that one more time.
Yeah, $23,572.05 is what that deer's restitution value.
Wow.
And hearing the judge deliver that sentence, and he told him what the value of wildlife was, and he explained to him how he, as far as wildlife crimes, he's had no respect for the law or the resource, and therefore he would not be able to legally hunt again, and this was the penalty that was going to be imposed. And wrapping up all this, even with the case, and we were fortunate. It was a big case. Officer Rice and I, we actually received that year we received the Ohio Bow Hunter Officer of the Year award. Both of us did for our work on this case. That was great, and it was great to be recognized. But at the end of the day, I still go back to Ian and Brad because those guys were robbed.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend so much of our time as wildlife officers, we're protecting our resources, and some of us look at us like we're the enemy or the bad guy. But we're out there to protect that resource so you have something to hunt. And Brad and Ian, the closest they ever came to this deer was when they got to hold it, before we put it in the evidence compound, and it was gone forever.
Yeah.
But without those guys, I told him, I said, do you ever think that you were never meant to kill that deer? You were only meant to put the facts together so we could make that case. And in my mind, they should have got an award.
Mm-hmm.
Without those guys, all I did was do the interview and put the pieces together. But those guys are the ones who really deserve a lot of this credit. And without them, we could have never put it together. But I still talk to Ian occasionally. I don't talk to Brad that much, but I talk to Ian. And since I've moved back away from there, and there's not a time that we don't talk, and we talk about that deer, and we talk about that moment, and that's what poachers do. There's a lot of times that guys, they know guys are doing things wrong, and they just won't speak up. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that hunters and the conservationists that pick up the phone and make a call. Yeah. And we can do it. Nobody has to know. We're allowed to do it under the radar. But there's so many times that guys have a chance to make a difference. And these were two guys who were trying to do the right thing, kill this legally, not have anybody saying that they killed this deer illegally because it was so big. There's a lot of controversy that comes around killing a big deer.
Absolutely.
You can do everything right, and somebody will still, there's a lot of jealousy and stuff like that. So these guys were trying to get ahead of it. And at the end of the day, we feel that justice was served as far as the case. And even though some people think he should have went to jail, but we feel that the lifetime revocation, the forfeiture, and all those other things, the restitution. But still yet, Brad and Ian, the only thing they got out of this was the satisfaction of knowing that deer hangs in our main office, and it doesn't hang in a poacher's den someplace. Is the only thing that they got out of it.
Yep, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Poachers are thieves. They steal from every one of us, whether you're a hunter or a non-hunter. That's an animal that you get to see out there. You get to experience as a hunter. It's something you could harvest. You research. You have it's fun.
Yeah,
and that's what gets stolen from them. So it was well put. And again, from Ethan's case to your case, information is key. So support your Operation Game Thieves, your tip. Turn in a poacher. International Wildlife Crime Stoppers, wildlifecrimestoppers.org. Check that out. You can report wildlife crime all 50 states and across Canada as well. So if you don't know how to report, that's the key. There's a way to report and a way to remain anonymous if you wish. These guys certainly wouldn't have. They wanted They wanted him to let him know that we caught you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was part of the motivation in this case, and making sure that we did everything right to do justice for those guys. And you talk about tip programs, and a lot of people don't realize this, but there's money involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
These organizations pay money for good information.
Absolutely.
And I am humbled. A lot of the guys that make us good cases, they don't want a dime.
Yeah,
but
like Ian and Brad probably wouldn't have took a dime.
Yeah, I guarantee they would have took a replica. But and
good point.
I wish I could have provided that for them because they were so deserving. And I know there's tons of hunters out there that have been robbed, just like they were. But I'm glad that I crossed paths with those guys, and you can't help but think that there wasn't a little divine intervention there with us crossing paths and becoming friends. And then this case, kind of intertwined us together. And I never pass a Frisch's Big Boy restaurant without thinking about this case. So
Yep, and everybody that listens to this podcast hears those words, big boy, will always think of your case and those guys that turned them in, and Ohio's big boy that was in Kentucky, and that certainly that got taken off the books.
Yeah, so I can remember. It's funny because I can remember. I mean, anytime you get a deer of that caliber being real big, and I can remember the biologist from Kentucky. When it come out that it didn't come from Kentucky, they were like, "This was our chance to be on the map," you know.
Yeah.
And then you went and made this case, and you proved it came from Ohio. But you know, even Kentucky's got a lot of nice deer. They're getting their herds getting better and better. But yeah, it's one of those ones. I mean, you know, I'm blessed. I've been blessed in this career. It's all I've ever wanted to do since I was 6 years old, and I've been fortunate enough to make a lot of great cases. But when you and I were talking about a case that sticks out, like that case will always stick out. Doesn't have anything to do with the award. It has to do with those guys, and it has to do with catching somebody who had broke the law. I mean, 13 priors. Proud of that one. Proud of the work that Chris Rice and I did on it. And it was a team effort with a group of good hunters, and a little bit of luck doesn't help.
Yeah, it was really an Ohio case because you were out of district. I mean, you brought a lot of things to the table on that one. So
it was a good one.
Yeah, Ohio can be proud that you recovered that deer.
Yeah, I'm awful satisfied that, like I said, it sets in our district office and not his home. So that's
100%.
That's great. I don't get to see it much because I'm not in District 5, but occasionally when I get to the Spring Valley Range, I get a chance to look at it and remember that day. So it was a win for the good guys, Wayne.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris Gilkey, Ohio Game Warden.
Thanks to Wayne Saunders from the Warden's Watch podcast for part 1 of the Big Boy Buck story. Now here's part 2 from the hunter's perspective.
A lot of poaching cases come from really good information and really good hunters. And I'm going to say this, I try to say this, if I can say this every podcast, I will. Hunters are conservationists. And I want to keep driving that home. And certainly my guests today are an example of that in so many different ways. Ian Obenshain and Brad Bailey are the two hunters that were in the pursuit of the big boy. You guys have now heard Chris Gilkey's podcast regarding the epic deer. I like to use that word a lot, guys, so that's my word, is epic. So the epic deer named Big Boy. And you know, who named that deer, Ian, Brad? Was it you guys?
Yeah, it was. It was us. Yeah, great to be here with you, Wayne. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Ian, and Brad's sitting next to me. Yeah, Big Boy was, obviously fitting. It was, not sure which one of us, I think we sat down, and I'm not sure how that exactly came about. It's been a while, but yep, he was a big boy.
And we talked a little bit earlier, but you guys, I mean, this is how many years ago that this occurred?
This was 2009, 2010, I believe. Maybe the summer of 2009.
Yeah, so quite a long time in between here. And you guys were on if this was happening now, if you guys were following a deer, the technology changing cameras and everything. But back then, technology was pretty clunky coming into it. Probably the beginning of the digital age, so to speak, with trail cameras.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there was no cell cams that I remember. So we were out there checking the cameras. And the video camera, stuff wasn't what it is today. So
right,
we were just getting into the video camera, in the videoing hunts type of deal, and so that's all changed quite a bit. It was not as advanced as it is now, for sure.
Right. You guys, were you together when you first saw this deer, or was it just one of you doing a drive-by?
I believe it was me, and I'm not sure how long before. It wasn't long. I'm not sure what the exact circumstances, but there's a large bean field off the side of a pretty main road in the county that I live off of, and so I believe one day, driving home or driving around the evenings looking for velvet bucks in the beans, I came across this guy, and he was just something that like nothing I've ever seen before. And I'd known Brad through high school, a small town, knew him through school. He's got two brothers, knew his younger brother, hung out with him and quite a bit. And then me and Brad ended up going to the same college and lived close by in an apartment complex on that campus, or just off campus. And I hadn't really been into hunting much up until this point. And then Brad he's been hunting his whole life. Knowing Brad from that and knowing his background, I believe I saw you at the fair.
It's at the county fair.
The county fair, I had gotten some footage of the buck, a big boy, and saw Brad at the county fair. Said, "Hey man, you got to come out to my car and check this out." And just wanted to get his opinion. Have the possibility of filming this deer. I really wanted to get on film if we could hunt him on film, get a kill on film, but certainly wanted his input on hunting this deer. What did I need to do? This is something that I'm only been doing this a couple of years. He's been doing this whole life. So he had a wealth of information on how to do that and go about that and kind of, the wisest way to approach this.
So the first time I saw the deer at the county fair, he's on I think it's flip phone, it's poor quality. He's trying to show me through this flip phone. And my first words are, "Have you shown this to anybody?" So please tell me you've shown this to anybody. I was like, this thing is the real deal. And from there on, it was like pretty much just code talking around everybody. It was nothing I'd ever seen before. I'd seen big deer, but not world class. And this thing was world class. So it blew my mind when I saw it. I was thankful that he came to just try and help him, get through it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before.
Wow. So Big Boy kind of brought you guys together as hunting partners. Did that continue after this deer?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually, and thinking through this whole thing and, recently, thinking back on it, it's super unfortunate the way it unfolded in a lot of ways, but, the silver lining is it brought us together. Now we're super close and have been and hunted together and fished together and been best of friends since. So that was really, that's something that I look back on. I'm super thankful for, and Big Boy brought us together like that. Yeah.
So tell me about, now that that deer's there, how'd you guys go about dissecting this, so to speak?
Yeah. So we, for me, it was all about, getting a pattern put together and trying to figure out what we could possibly figure out that he would do when the beans turned yellow, because around here, our season comes in at the end of September, and normally all the beans are turning yellow or have already turned yellow. And that was where Brad came. And Brad actually you guided in Illinois for a college internship or something. So he had a lot of experience guiding and putting together, these plans and getting big deer on the ground. He just kind of walked me through what the process should be. And, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know we tried to get a lot of footage. We got trail cameras out, got pictures of him, got where he was coming from. It kind of explained to me that in the summertime, these deer can move for quite a ways to get to their summer food sources, which right here are usually soybeans. I think that's the preferred food source. And what we found out is he was moving quite a distance from where he was actually bedding to where he was feeding in this bean field. So the strategy of hunting that property or that bean field probably wasn't going to work out come season. We knew that he probably wasn't going to be there. He was going to be back, on a different pattern. So trying to get that put together and, figure out acorns, and we were putting corn out and mineral, and felt like we were pretty close to where he was bedding. And we were just hoping and praying that was going to maintain come season.
Right. So you kind of walked your cameras back to where you thought he was, and you tried to narrow it down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that season persist? I mean, here it comes the beginning of archery season, and tell me about that season of searching for Big Boy.
Yeah. So we were.
I can see the chagrins too, guys. I'm sorry. I can see it on your face because I can see you put a lot of effort and time into this, and that's what we're building up to. So for sure. But I can see it on your faces.
Amount of time.
Yeah, the time was. The commitment. I didn't have a family at that point. I was in a relationship. Brad was starting a family, and the time commitment was it was outrageous. We were literally spending most of every day putting together the plan, being out there scouting, getting tree stands set up, and trying to hone this plan. And come season, and try to learn how to film, because we were trying to film this whole thing. So that's a whole different ballgame when you're trying to film and hunt.
Tell me.
It adds such, just a whole other level of complexity to the whole thing. So we were trying to get that. We didn't want, the first time we were in a tree with a camera to be when he walked out. So we were just practicing and trying to get this whole thing down. And early on in September, he disappeared. And it was first week or so in September, he disappeared. Beans were still green, so we were kind of worried about that, but it's not abnormal for deer to, especially big deer like that. He was getting more pressure, I'm sure, from people driving down the road and slowing down and taking a look, so we thought, well, maybe he just got bumped, or maybe he's, on a different pattern now. And it was a bummer, and we were worried about it, but it wasn't abnormal. So we didn't lose a lot of sleep over it. We just, kept on with the plan. And come season, we hunted hard. Tried to be smart about it, but we were excited. And, I think that first morning, I don't know what time I got in the tree stand that opening morning, but I pretty much camped out in the tree and never did have an encounter. Saw some of the bucks that he would hang around with, or that he was close to on a summer pattern, which was worrisome. But he was a different level. He was a different caliber. We knew that he could be just hiding in a 1 acre hole somewhere, in a thicket, and just not going to show himself in the daylight. That was my thought process going through that season. We never did see him. Never did get another picture of him. Mm-hmm. And that's how that season progressed.
But put a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of going to check stations looking for pictures of him, someone else killing him, looking on Facebook. You guys were in pursuit of Big Boy that whole season. That was your focus.
That was it. And yeah, you hit it, man. Every night you go home and you pull up Facebook, just fearing the worst. You're just waiting for that to pop up, or for some buddies are constantly throughout the season sending you pictures. So as soon as one of my hunting buddies or somebody that I knew was in the hunting game I'd see a picture pop up, and I would just get nauseous. You're just waiting, but never did happen. So we thought, hey, maybe he's survived and he's going to be a world record typical next year. Yeah, which we thought he probably was on his way to.
Yeah, and talking about getting nauseous, I think that's the way Chris Gilkey almost describes Brad as he showed up at that. What specific show? I can't remember. It was the Ohio Whitetail, or do you remember the exact show?
Expo.
So
Deer Turkey Expo in Columbus.
Deer and Turkey Expo. So, but when Chris describes Brad showing up, he thinks it's an emergency because Brad, it doesn't look like he's got any color in his face. He knows his wife's pregnant. And he's thinking, I'm going to have to help this guy out some way, if we're going to have to get him to a hospital to see his wife's having birth. Or, he describes Brad's look like a state of emergency. And that's probably how you felt too, wasn't it, Brad?
That's pretty much. So I was up there helping a friend try to book some hunts. He's a booking agent, and I knew some of the properties that he had. So I was trying to help him along. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been at the show at all. I was just there to help him. Another guy that we knew, Logan McNulty, his dad owned Walker Tree Stands, and he was there helping his dad. But we had knew him through the filming thing. He was trying to help us out with camera equipment. And he walks up to me in the middle of the show on the first day, and he said, "You know that deer you showed me?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "I think it's in the booth behind you." And I'm like, "Nah. I doubt it. I haven't had time to walk around or anything yet, so I had no idea." He's like, "Dude, seriously, you need to probably come with me." I was like, "All right, let's go." And walk around the corner, and I didn't even make it to the booth, and I saw it. I didn't see that it said, Kentucky state record or anything like that, but I was like, that is not good. And on our way, I was just going to walk back, to the booth I was working at, and Logan said, "Dude, it says Kentucky state record." I was like, are you kidding me? And I walked back around. At this point, I couldn't even talk. I was like, okay, I saw Gilkey earlier. So I booked it around to the front, knowing what booth he was working. And that's the point where I'm white as a sheet. I'm sure I couldn't get the words out to tell him that, Big Boy was up there. He definitely thought something was wrong with me, but I finally got it out and said, it's Big Boy, and he's here at the show, and he's in a booth up here with some guy. It's the new Kentucky state record. And Gilkey's his demeanor changed immediately. And because, that feeling that you know that there's foul play. I mean, it was immediate. There was no like, oh man, maybe it swam the river. Well, we're in the northern part of that county.
Right.
They don't go down there.
Yeah.
And then where he's saying he killed it, that's even farther. So it wasn't going to happen. Yeah. From there, Gilkey pretty well took care of us. We rounded up what footage and pictures. I mean, we had hundreds of pictures, 40-some minutes of video of every angle you could ever want from this deer. We at least did have good quality for the day. We had a cutting back that was state of the art then as far as trail cameras go.
Mm-hmm.
And we had really good quality footage of everything about that deer. And yeah, it was a wild ride after that.
Yeah, no, what timing though to have Chris at that show as well and put that together, because I'm sure when you told him what the title said in Kentucky State Record, I mean, he instantly in his brain said poached, because that's what I would have done, right? And you guys did too. You were like instantly, you kind of put it together too, that this stinks to high heaven.
Yeah, for sure. Going back a little bit, Chris was a new game warden in the county, and we met. I'm not sure how we met him, but we ended up meeting up with Chris and becoming pretty good friends with him prior to finding out about Big Boy locating him. So we were already hanging out with Chris, hunting with him even, and pretty good friends. And as soon as we got that footage, we knew, I mean, instantly we were both, there was no question we needed to get a hold of Chris, not only because he's a hunting buddy of ours and we want to show him this, but he's the new county game warden and he needs to know about this because this is going to draw some attention, not only from poachers, but also if we are to kill this thing, we wanted to cover our bases and make sure there weren't any questions. There were several cases back, of giant deer being killed, what I assume legally, but there's always somebody that, says something or rumors and you end up having to try to defend yourself and it can ruin a really good thing. So we wanted to get out ahead of that. So yeah, he knew about that deer prior. So yeah, as soon as he saw that at the expo, I think he knew. I think we all knew. It just wasn't probable. It wasn't feasible that deer was going to end up that far away.
We know what happened. Chris did a great podcast with me and was able to make that case, which was that's huge. And you guys played a big role in it by the camera footage, the pictures, everything else, because now we know pretty much that with the antlers, it's almost like a fingerprint. You can almost determine perfectly where these deer, that deer is this deer, just by looking at it, and have experts testify to it if necessary and things like that. But you guys supplied all that evidence to him to bring that all together to make sure. As a matter of fact, the guy that poached it identified it when your picture was thrown there. That's my deer. Yep, that's my deer. I mean, you can't nail anything better when a guy says, yeah, that picture, that's the deer I shot right there. And then, that just brings that all together. So, but from your perspective, I mean, we go from Brad turning white, with that thing. And you guys were probably on a little, Brad, you must have been on little pins and needles. You want this case to happen, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, the whole rest of the show, I had a hard time helping my buddy to do it. Yeah, I mean, I was calling him and my wife because I had all the camera footage at my house and all the pictures. Just didn't think that was the way that was going to go down. I remember telling my wife, I was like, "We're going to make this deer famous." She was kind of making fun of us about all the camera equipment and all the time spent.
Mm.
I was like, "We're going to make it famous." Just didn't expect it to go like this and make it famous like that. I mean, the deer deserves every bit of credit, but as much antler he's got on his head, it's worth being seen, but just not like that.
Yeah, this just when I hear poachers are thieves, poachers steal from people, and that just emanates from you guys that you put this effort into it, you dialed this in, and then it was stolen. And that's a lot of time and effort, and sometimes that's more important than money for sure. And the opportunity to have like you said, a legal hunt and be able to harvest an animal to that quality, was taken from it. And I just, it infuriates me as a game warden that happens. But, let's face it, there's over 100 trophy wildlife cases nationwide in North America every year. And those are the reasons why. That's why when it used to have the deer pools, that was the worst driving poaching thing you ever had. If you get a new rifle and $1,000, there was guys out shining and shooting deer to register in the pool like crazy. Anything to get that prize to win the other prize. So you get a great buck and you get a rifle and a couple $1,000s to boot. So, and it's money and bragging rights that sometimes drive poaching, and for sure. And I think the bragging rights came into this. And I mean, when you can label a deer like that, the Kentucky state record, but inside, I don't know how people operate inside. And I'm sure you guys can't relate to that either, because you were going to do it the right way and then it was stolen from you.
Yeah, it's difficult. It was a tough pill to swallow. We could have killed that deer 100 times illegally, pretty easily with, probably a handgun. We were in the bean field with him almost every evening. Pretty daggone close, maybe too close sometimes. Too close. But yeah, it's tough. It's unfortunate that there are people like that out there. It's the reality, but it's tough. It's tough pill to swallow.
For sure. Well, thanks for sitting down and giving me the hunter side of it. And, the other thing is the poaching, reporting information. And that's how probably some of the best cases game wardens make are guys like you. They can dial things in and give us that evidence. Without that evidence, I think Chris did an outstanding job as an interviewer, but if things clam up, we have to use those fingerprints, so to speak, all the evidence gathered. And I think it's more common today than it was back then that guys are studying, they're locating big bucks, and then they're studying them, and then they're being very, very good at killing these animals, but they're also learning their habits and everything else. They're almost like biologists with a purpose. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I find it fascinating too. I mean, coming in from the other side and just learning that habitat. In the Northeast too, people are just starting to dial in these bucks and do that type of thing, and then hunt specific animals. That's very, very interesting. That's only really happened in the past, probably since you guys started. Maybe I think it happened in, Ohio and Illinois and all that before it happened here, but it certainly has gravitated to the Northeast and other places where you see an animal and you look to harvest that animal. And it's kind of cool. It's a pursuit of something different. You're not a meat hunter. You're, whether you want to call it a trophy hunter or not, but it's certainly a harvestable animal. And we think it's great. And I think it's kind of cool that you're mini biologists and everything you learn about deer habitat.
Yeah, for sure. It's a year-long process nowadays, which is, it's neat. It's way more than just waiting for opening day and popping your butt in a tree stand. You're literally working year-round, scouting and food plots and cameras, and it's a second full-time job a lot of times for a lot of guys. The amount of work that's being put into this is tremendous. So yeah, it's pretty neat. It's quite the process nowadays.
And I think it's pretty cool that this year brought you guys together as hunting partners too. I mean, it would have been nice if you could have harvested it together. 100%. I get it. But it's kind of funny, Ian, that you saw this buck and like, I need the resources to be able to do this right. And then you go to Brad, a friend and now a very good friend and a hunting partner. And I think that's a really cool story to tell out of, it's making lemonade out of lemons. Because let's face it, this is a very sour case for everybody. But I think in the end, you guys made out good by Big Boy had a reason he brought you guys together.
That's right. Yeah. And Chris too. Chris did a heck of a job. I mean, it was amazing to us. The deer was a big deal to us, but to see it being such a big deal to Chris and the rest of the law enforcement side, that meant a lot. And it was encouraging that they took it seriously as they did, and really just did a phenomenal job on the case and took it, way farther than we thought that it was going to get taken. And that was nice to see. That was really, we knew Chris was a good guy. He was a good buddy, but what we learned through that process is he's a heck of a investigator too. And, that was pretty cool to watch play out. It was terrible, in a lot of ways, but it was cool to see how it ended and see how they handled it, the professionalism and just the grit, man. Those guys worked hard to get every ounce of retribution that they could. So it was cool.
Yeah, no, I would agree. He worked very hard on that case, and it's near and dear to his heart. The first thing he wanted to podcast was about Big Boy and that experience, and I don't blame him. For a game warden, that's a case of a lifetime, if you ask me. But I did kind of throw that out in a challenge, though, that Chris, that's a case of a lifetime. Let's see if you can do one better. So,
he will. I guarantee it.
Yeah, he seems like a guy that rises to challenges. That's the only reason I threw that out there.
Yep, exactly. He's tenacious, man.
That's great, and thank you for sitting down and sharing the hunter side of things, because sometimes we forget how much you guys invest in our natural resources as much as we do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, and we appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you for joining us for episode 302 of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt podcast, where we teamed up with Wayne Saunders of the Warden's Watch podcast. It was an eye-opening deer poaching case from 2010 involving a record-setting deer named Big Boy. As we mentioned in the opening, we typically avoid discussing poaching cases. However, in this case, we felt this story serves as a crucial reminder of the importance of ethical hunting and wildlife conservation. With modern tools and apps, hunters and landowners can now easily report illegal activities, ensuring that our forests remain a haven for ethical hunting. We hope you found this two-part narrative, featuring insights from both a conservation officer and observant hunters, as compelling as we did. Don't forget to check out Warden's Watch for more fascinating stories from the world of game wardens. Thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt podcast. We can be found on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you would like to support us and our cause, please consider buying some merchandise off of our merch page by visiting www.bigbuckmerch.com. Catch you next time, and good luck in the deer woods.